The 1950s in Czechoslovakia marked one of the most tragic periods in its history. After the communist takeover in 1948, called the Victorious February, Soviet advisors guided purges aimed at consolidating the regime's absolute power. After the regime crushed its political opponents, the show trial soon reached communist insiders. One of the victims was Gustáv Husák. Once deputy party chairman, he was removed from his post as head of the Slovak Board of Commissioners, effectively the Slovak Prime Minister, and arrested on the 6th of February 1951. 3 years later, he was sentenced to life in prison, but after 9 years he was released under an amnesty. Ironically, the same man would later become the face of the hardline regime that had once jailed him. As Communist Party leader and eventually as president of Czechoslovakia, Gustáv Husák will shape the country's modern history like few others. He will spend 21 years at the top of the party and will become the defining symbol of the so-called Normalization era. Gustáv Husák, born Augustin Husák in 1913 in Dubravka in today's Slovakia, had a difficult childhood. He lost his mother before the age of 2, and his father, partially disabled from World War I, made a meager living as a farmer. Money was always scarce, but young Gustáv was determined to achieve more. He excelled at both elementary and secondary school, graduating with honors. Like many of his peers, he developed a strong interest in politics while still in high school. At 16, he joined the Communist Youth Union, and in 1933, as a law student, became a member of the Communist Party of Czechoslovakia. Politics consumed him, shaping not only his career but also his private life. In 1935, at a left-wing youth camp, he met Magda Lokvenkova, who would become his first wife. Although only 25, he was already an important left-wing figure. He contributed to a journal called DAV, a hub for like-minded intellectuals, writing about class struggle and the need to change the social order. Among the so-called Davists, he forged key alliances, including with Vladimir Klementis, an 11-year older parliamentarian and later the first foreign minister after the communist coup in 1948. Like Husák, Klementis would eventually fall victim to the Stalinist show trials of the 1950s, a part of the story yet to come. World War II marks a turning point in Husák's career. As a vocal opponent of the wartime Slovak state, which is a Nazi puppet state, he is imprisoned several times. Yet his resistance elevates him. He becomes deputy chairman of the Slovak Communist Party, and from 1943 also deputy head of the underground Slovak National Council. By the war's end, he is involved in preparing the Slovak national uprising against the Nazis, and these roles propelled him into the political spotlight. The first post-war elections of May 1946 brought disappointment for Husák and the Slovak communists. While their comrades in the Czech lands triumphed, Slovakia was won by the Democratic Party. Yet Husák managed the impossible. Instead of losing influence, he strengthened it. In June 1946, with his support, the United Czech Political Front forced the Slovak Democrats to sign the so-called Third Prague Agreement, which subordinated Slovak decisions to the Czechoslovak government. Husák himself became head of the Slovak Board of Commissioners, effectively Slovakia's government. This gave him direct control over both the Slovak police and secret police, making him a key player in the communist coup of 1948. From late 1947 onward, Husák organized provocations against the Democrats, forcing non-communist commissioners out of office. After the 1948 coup, he helped implement the new order. But, as would soon become clear, his loyalty did not guarantee him safety. The 1950s open with the consolidation of communist power. The first victims are both real and alleged enemies: non-communist wartime resistance fighters, RAF pilots, entrepreneurs, clergy. In show trials such as the infamous case of the popular deputy Milada Horáková, even death sentences are handed down. In all, there would be more than 200 judicial murders.
Nešť váš rozsudek dopadne jako železná pěs, bez nejmenšího slitování.
But even privileged party members are no longer safe. Communist MP Otto Schling and Party Secretary Rudolf Slansky are arrested for alleged anti-state activity. In January 1951, state security comes for Foreign Minister Vladimir Klementis, Husák's close ally, accusing him of bourgeois nationalism. Husák begins to fear for himself, but still believes that as a loyal communist, he is untouchable. He is wrong. On the 6th of February 1951, the Slovak Communist Party's secretary Štefan Bašťovanský summons Husák to his office. It is a trap. Instead, 3 armed men await him. Husák is taken first to Prague's Růžňany prison, then to the dungeons of Koloděje Castle. Like Klementis, he is accused of bourgeois nationalism. Here we must pause. The charges were fabricated, yet they rested on some truths. From his youth, Husák rejected the idea of a single Czechoslovak nation, instead favoring a Czech-Slovak dualism. A letter from 1944 even shows him suggesting Slovakia should join the Soviet Union after the war. Later, he justified this as a tactical move to pressure the Czechoslovak government in exile in London to recognize Slovak demands. Back to the story. At Koloděje, Husák's interrogator is Bohumil Dobek, a man who had played a key role in preparing former trials. Dobek tries to force a confession, but despite torture, Husák refuses to admit guilt. The investigation takes a long time, which would ultimately save his life. Klementis is being tried alongside Slansky and other high-ranking communists. Of 14 defendants in April 1952, 11, including Klementis, are sentenced to death. Husák's trial comes 2 years later, in April 1954, by which time Stalin and Czechoslovak Communist President Gottwald are dead and the purges are winding down. Even so, he receives life imprisonment. He would cycle through nearly every feared prison: Růžňany, Pankrác, Mírov, Bratislava. He never accepted his sentence, repeatedly appealing for a retrial and writing to the party leadership about a judicial mistake. In all, he spent 9 years in prison, 6 of them in isolation. Despite everything, Husák never turned against the Communist Party. After release, he worked manual jobs and later as a historian at the Slovak Academy of Sciences. In the 1960s, he sided with Reform Communist, supported their head Alexander Dubček, and in 1968 became Deputy Prime Minister of Czechoslovakia. Then came the Soviet invasion of August 1968, and Husák's dramatic turn. On the 20th of August, just a day before the Soviet invasion, Husák was still criticizing the slow pace of democratization at a rally in Žďár nad Hronom. But after Warsaw Pact troops occupied Czechoslovakia, he sensed an opportunity to defeat rivals and climb higher. On 23rd August, he flew to Moscow with a delegation led by President Ludvík Svoboda, and after talks with Soviet leader Leonid Brezhnev, he reversed his stance completely. For most, signing the so-called Moscow Protocol, retroactively legalizing the occupation, is their political swan song. For Husák, it is a career revival. With Moscow's backing, he becomes head of the Communist Party in April 1969. At that moment, the last hopes of preserving even fragments of democratization disappear.
Prešli sme obdobia, pravda. Poznáte ich, nebudem tu na históriu opakovať. Kedy sa veľmi ťažko pracovalo a kedy vydržali tí statoční, Nech odpadne, čo je kolísavé, nech odpadne, čo je oportunistické. Ale nech v tej strane zostane, čo je pevné, čo je charakterné, čo chce za tento národ zápasiť, tak chce niečo.
This consolidation comes to be known as normalization, and Husák, now the most powerful man in the country, enforces it rigorously. His own prison experience of the 1950s softened him not at all. Under his leadership, Czechoslovakia fully aligns with Moscow, political purges resume, and even some of those who had fought for Husák's rehabilitation are imprisoned. On top of this, the communists tighten censorship, close the borders, dismiss critics from their jobs, imprison the loudest dissenters, and drive tens of thousands of people to flee abroad. Although factional infighting is constant in the party leadership, Husák, backed by the Soviets, stays in power. He reaches the peak in 1975, replacing the ailing Ludvík Svoboda as president of Czechoslovakia. He would be re-elected head of state twice more, in 1980 and 1985. By then, however, his health is failing. At 70, the years in prison had taken their toll. He suffers from diabetes and is a heavy smoker. His condition worsens further after a tragedy, the death of his second wife, Věra, whom he married in 1973. She rarely appeared in public, working as an editor for the newspaper Pravda in Bratislava. In autumn 1977, while flying by army helicopter for medical treatment of a broken arm, the aircraft crashed in bad weather, and Věra Husáková was killed at age 54. Husák's influence only waned in December 1987, when Miloš Jakeš replaced him as party leader. He remained president until the democratic Velvet Revolution swept him away. He resigned the presidency on the 10th of December 1989.